4 Degrees to the Streets is designed to empower anyone curious about places and spaces, not just persons with professional degrees or backgrounds. Here we will cover a host of topics, including transportation, health, housing, and the environment through the lens of racism, classism, and sexism, and give listeners the tools they need to overcome institutional barriers. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the 4 Degrees Pod, and tune in every other Tuesday where Nimo and Jas keep it 4 degrees to the streets. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast. Ooh, this is the end of season 3. It's been such a fun season, going on 3 years of doing the show. I feel like we've gotten a chance to get to know our listeners better. We've met a lot of new listeners this season, virtually. So we appreciate you all connecting with us, staying engaged, giving us inspiration. And so we are excited for what's to come for season 4. We are super excited to how we are ending our last episode. We have a special guest with us today, Nina Idamudia. I will introduce her in a bit. But Jasmine, how are you holding up today?
Thanks for asking me this time, Nemo, for the people who listen
You saw
to
I put it in there. I said, don't be mannerless. Like, ask how she's doing.
I'm doing good. We're recording on a Monday. I think it's the last Monday of Women's History Month. So it's very befitting that we're having this conversation with Nina and Nemo and Jasmine. Just stressed out on a Monday. How are you doing?
I am doing well. I think the Monday started off great. I've been on my Orange Theory kick, and it always makes me feel like I can do anything. And then the day defeats me at some point before noon again, and I'm like, can I do all of this? But it's been a pretty good day. I can't complain. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our special guest, and I'll read her bio, and then we'll get into the conversation. And I'm sure many of you listening are very familiar with Nina. She has been a great example, and like if we could have a Black female planning mentor, this would be her. And so I look forward to this connection and collaboration on today's episode and many more into the future. So Nina, as a native Detroiter, understands firsthand how the built environment shapes the lives of society's most vulnerable populations. This fuels her passion for empowering people to be change agents through planning. Nina started her career as a planner for the city of Los Angeles, but currently serves as a Chicago Recovery Plan Director for the City of Chicago's Department of Planning and Development. She specializes in equitable community development, inclusive outreach strategies, and organizational innovation for planning agencies. Nina has 2 awards from the American Planning Association, is a Vanguard Fellow, a New Leaders Council Fellow, and was also honored with a Shiro Award by the Los Angeles Council member Kern D. Price Jr. for her community leadership. Nina was recently elected the first Black president of the Illinois chapter of the American Planning Association. She is also a board member of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and a graduate of University of Michigan and the University of Southern California. So Nina, how are you doing? And how did you discover urban planning as a profession? What did you see yourself doing when you started your planning education? And how is that related to where you are now? So I know that's a lot, but
that is a lot.
Break it up however you see fit.
What up? Hey, I'm happy to be here with y'all. Yeah, I every guest always says, because I listened to a few episodes, and every guest is always like, it's weird hearing my bio written out loud, read out loud. And it is. And then I was like, dang, I forgot a few things.
Let us know.
No, it's good to be here. So thank you for inviting me to your platform. Really excited. When I heard a podcast about planning hosted by 2 Black women, sign me up. Give it to me. You know, I could not be more prouder to be on your platform and to see, and also reading up on you too. You all are amazing as well. So it was a no-brainer for me to say yes. Well, how did I get to urban planning? I feel like everybody, every marginalized group is always like, I didn't fall on planning fell on me type of thing. although like I'm from Detroit, you could probably hear it in my voice. I almost said what up though when I said the first thing that came out of my mouth, I was like, okay, let me not get too Detroit on them, at least not yet. But obviously, it didn't take too long.
No, we want all of the Detroit.
Detroit.
We want all of the Detroit on the episode. Yes.
Y'all are probably gonna hear it in my voice for sure. And I also tend to talk fast. I think it's also the Detroit spirit in me to like, we be hustling. So we say a lot of things in a very short amount of time. So yeah, grew up on the east side of Detroit. Grew up poor, Telly also understands the struggle. That's my dog in the background. She's neighborhood watch, so she just looks out the window and barks at random people. And so growing up in Detroit, like most people, grew up with a finite amount of resources, but didn't understand why. Went to school in the suburbs for most of my life, from third grade to the time I graduated high school. Did not live in that suburb that I went to school in. So took the bus, the 8 Mile bus. Yes, 8 Mile does exist. If you've seen the movie, it is a real street. Back and forth between the east side of Detroit and Harper Woods, where I went to school, but living most of that time in Detroit. And so like just seeing the landscape change as I was going from my neighborhood to the neighborhood that I went to school in. And I've always been a person who is very curious about the outcomes of people, like why people ended up the way they did. My mother went to prison when I was 10. And so that definitely shaped the way I thought about life. And even though she was college educated, she went to law school. She didn't finish because she had 3 kids, but she went to law, all these things, but still this, sometimes depending on where you're born or where you live, you can't outrun the social factors that impede a lot of our communities, right? Or affect a lot of our communities in that way. And so, yeah, I was always just very curious. I'm also an Aquarius, so I think about things a lot. I think about people and relationships a lot. And so growing up, I was always interested in like African American history, the history of my grandparents. My father is Nigerian, so I had that history. And then my mother, my maternal grandparents are from Sunflower, Mississippi. So I'm like a descendant of slaves. So like having those two cultures merge and me trying to understand both of those sides of me definitely influenced how I thought about the world. And by the time I went to college, I went to the University of Michigan, go blue. I decided to do African American studies and women's studies. And my mom was like, why are you getting a degree in yourself? As I like to tell people. But it was because I wanted to learn more about people like me, right? Like, how did I'm the exception to the rule, not the rule in a lot of ways. Being the way that I grew up versus how the opportunities that I've been able to have in life. And so it just made me think a lot. And then one of my advisors from Michigan for my African American Studies program was like, oh, the urban planning program in Michigan is recruiting. Are you interested? Did not know what urban planning was. Bada boom, bada bing. Googled it. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds fun. Like so that's kind of how I fell into it.
I think that's such an important story. I think for everybody that studies planning, there's always a very like circuitous pathway to the profession. There's very few people who are in high school and like, yeah, I'm going to be a planner when I grow up. I haven't heard that ever. Even still with all of the programming that goes on in terms of trying to recruit students and minority students to the profession, I still don't think that many people seek that out initially. And we had another episode, we talked to other people who studied different things but ended up being planners. But I just want to go back to your bio because it's a very, and you talked about this before we got on the show, but it's a very storied and high accomplished bio. So I just want to congratulate you on having the AICP and all the different roles that you served in and different awards that you received in a different basically like every organization that you participate in is like the pinnacle of being in planning. And so congratulations
Thank you
to you for that. And everyone has heard Nimo and I's story on how we discovered planning. Nimo studying geography.
No, I was actually a senior in high school when I discovered planning.
Oh, so Nemo is
So
the exception.
I'm the like rare unicorn. And so I studied planning both in undergrad and grad school.
That's dope.
And I also studied in undergrad and grad school, but I started in undergrad as a psychology major. And that was in a way that you studied African American studies and wanted to understand your family's dynamic. I wanted to be a psychologist because I had parents who were addicted to drugs. And so I felt like this was important for me. And then another counselor of mine told me about urban planning, which the program was just kind of starting off. It was mostly a graduate program. They hadn't had an undergraduate class graduate with that degree yet. And so Googled it, was like, oh, this is perfect. I love this. So just sharing our story and how it all fits in, I think that's interesting. It's always interesting to me to see how other people who are in planning have found the career and found their pathway within it.
Yeah, what I noticed about a lot of the stories, I mean, I graduated from high school in 2008, so, and I went to grad school in 2012. So a lot of these things that we're talking about in planning now were like, I won't say that people weren't talking about them in planning ever, but I feel like it was finally a part of the curriculum. And I was like in that in between of when nobody was talking about it versus when everybody was talking about it. What I mean by it is like diversity, equity, inclusion in a planning program. And so, I mean, it's funny because people don't know about planning. Well, Black people and people of color don't know about planning by design. Planning is a tool of institutional racism. Planning is a tool of white supremacy. Even calling myself a planner and being a part of the American Planning Association or being a government worker, there's always this identity crisis that I find myself in of wanting to change a system that was not meant for me. And so it doesn't surprise me when I hear my peers, like people my age and older, say, oh, I didn't know about this. This wasn't something that was brought to my attention. But it makes me so proud to hear that people who are younger than me are being introduced at a younger age. And that was part of, even when I decided to go to grad school, I ended up going to University of Southern California for planning school. I hated it. I was miserable. It was a complete white bubble in the middle of South Central. I thought I was getting boys in the hood. So, I was getting Detroit with palm trees. That's what I thought I was getting into. And then I got there and it was just this white institution surrounded by this fence in a neighborhood with so much rich history. And so I went to the administration. I was like, we got to do something about this. Like, the classes and people's ignorant comments. I was African American studies major, right? Everybody else was an architect undergrad, urban studies undergrad, engineers, geography, like those kind of like type of degrees. And here I am, talking, the girl from Detroit with the accent, talking about my lived experience and saying that their experience was actually diminished because they had not lived the life that I had lived. I had found strength finally in throughout identities that had been marginalized for so long. And I had actually told the administration, I was like, y'all need to start bringing youth here. I had worked with youth throughout undergrad. And in fact, because I grew up poor and did not have money, I, had a job when I landed in LA. I had a job before I even set foot in California. And I worked with youth in this program called Gear Up, which was also in Michigan. It's like a undergraduate preparedness program for middle school and high school students. So anyway, I convinced the administration to fund a program for 100 students to learn about planning. And so that was kind of like how it's like, you know what? I don't want people to wait until they get to this moment to learn about planning. We need to be, even if they don't end up planners, they need to have the language to understand how to dissect this system again that was not meant for us. So it doesn't surprise me to hear that, but I am very proud to see how far we've come in educating younger people about specific, not just younger people, but Black and brown youth about urban planning and structural racism that's tied to it.
And I think as much as you inform younger people, even if they decide to pursue something completely different, right? Even if they go through various planning, preparedness, programming that are geared towards high school and undergraduate students, and they decide to still study business or engineering or finance or whatever, that knowledge around the policies and the plans and the programs that have impacted negatively Black and brown communities through the history of planning will be stuck with them forever. And I hope that it will make that's kind of the purpose of our podcast, is to reach people who haven't studied planning, but we're all impacted by it. So whether or not you know that your town is currently in the master planning process, you're going to be impacted by it. Whether or not you know that there's a highway expansion project happening, you're going to be impacted by it. And that, in a way, is what makes planning so important, is because even people who don't participate in it, if you're not being reached through the advocacy, through the engagement efforts, or you're not being reached through the community outreach programs, you're still going to be impacted by it. So you might as well learn as much as you can about it, because it's going to impact your life. And I think for a lot of ways, planning has succeeded in being in perpetuating systemic racism, because it's been a little black box that you only know about if there's an issue. People aren't involved, particularly Black and brown people aren't involved in the planning process. And then historically, even when they were involved, their ideas and their opinions were silenced in an effort of, oh, economic development. Oh, we can't worry about that now. We got to get the downtown together. And it's like, it's just a lot of issues and variables.
Absolutely. And I think the more what I would hope to do is not only teach Black and brown youth about urban planning, but then also have our white colleagues who perpetuate harm every day, including myself, right? I mean, like, I am a part of an institution, again, that wasn't built for people like me. And so just innately, philosophically, I am helping to perpetuate that harm but I'm also actively, because that's my purpose, undoing that harm. So we also need my white colleagues to acknowledge it. And there's no racism fairy that went around and made, my neighborhood what it is versus what your neighborhood was versus what their neighborhood was. Like, these are people making decisions who have racist ideologies or they perpetuate them. And so it's really important to have both of those things hold true, and then us all to work towards undoing the harm that was done.
There is no racism fairy.
There's no racism fairy.
I love that. I thought that was our first episode of the podcast. Basically, could have been called "There's No Racism."
No racism fairy.
This is history. This is what happened.
Holding on, because that might be the title of another episode soon to come. So we looked at your bio. We talked about that a lot, but we noticed that you've held both public and private roles across the country, in different cities across the country. How did your planning experiences differ by region? And from your perspective, what are each region's most significant urban planning challenges? You had a role on the West Coast in LA, various roles in the Midwest. What do you see as being the biggest challenges in those regions, and how did your experiences differ by region?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have had the privilege, and I do mean privilege, to work in two very different areas. And I think of it as a privilege because I think it makes me a better planner in a lot of ways. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So, like, being a kid from Detroit, understanding the built environment the way it was, and the way my life is set up, and how my family still lives in Detroit, and I still visit, and there's still abandoned houses and all that stuff. And then, like, uprooting my entire life when I had known nothing else, at the age of 22, to Los Angeles. And again, I was like, oh, this is Detroit with palm trees, like, very similar, but understanding the nuances of the Black diaspora, and our experiences are so similar, but also very nuanced, and you have to respect those nuances. And so it humbled me to learn planning in a place that I was not from. Because I really I could not make any assumptions. I really did have to listen. And I think people take that for granted. People think they know everything. And so going into that environment, I was like, no, I'm like learning from this experience, but I also did feel empowered to speak up to my classmates and to my professors because of that wall that was around the school. And I'm like, y'all don't understand me and y'all don't understand them. And so, I felt like it was a privilege to be embraced by another place. And I lived in LA for 7 years and love it and miss it. And all my friends are there. Shout out to y'all. And then, like, also California just has a lot of planning regulations. Obviously CEQA, which is environmental state legislation, in which, I was writing like 30-page staff reports, but then 100-page environmental analysis on top of that. One of my biggest projects was I worked on the LAX renovation for the Olympics, which I know LAX is terrible now, but come 2028, hopefully it's going to be a lot better. And my name is on that report. And then I worked on like design guidelines for West LA, transit. I worked on the transit neighborhood teams, that's at least what they used to call it when I was there. I worked on performance management. And Los Angeles has one of the largest planning departments in the country. By numbers, 400 people in that department. And so I was very privileged to like have those resources and be able to learn planning in such a dynamic place where you could go from the valley to the shore and it's a completely different scenario. You could go in the valley and you could be by horses and people who, cowboys and stuff like that. Or you're, like I said, in South Central, where I felt like I knew a little bit more, but again, we're still learning. So I was really blessed to do that because by the time I came to Illinois, I knew a lot about how to read the zoning code, how to interpret the zoning code. Los Angeles has like 13 or 14, zoning administrators, whatever the number is. Chicago has one, so like just the scale is different. And in Los Angeles, a lot of the issues surrounded housing, of course, like housing was huge. Housing is huge. It's not is a huge problem. Affordability is a huge problem. Thinking about transit systems, how to back off of a car-centric city and try to incorporate more transit. I always say I'm a land use planner who thinks about transit, not a transit planner. And so it was really cool to kind of learn it in the California context, specifically in LA. And then coming to Chicago, I came out right out the gate working for the city of Chicago, working on what we call plan developments, which is things that go to the city plan commission. And then I went to Muse Community Design to be their director of planning, which is another kind of consulting firm out here in Illinois and Chicago. And then I went back to the city to be the chief of staff to Commissioner Maurice Cox, who used to be the planning director of the city of Detroit. When Mayor Lightfoot won, she hired him on. I became his chief of staff, and now I'm the director of the Chicago Recovery Plan for the department. So in Illinois, a lot less environmental regulations. In fact, I think there's probably some room to add some analysis but the density is different, right? So I'm like, oh, when I was, a 4 or 5 story building, I was writing all sorts of environmental, staff reports. But in Chicago, you could do a 500-foot tower and everybody's like, okay, 4-page staff report. All right, that's enough. And I'm like, wait. So it was shocking, but that's just how it is. The environmental regulations are not as steep here. They have a lot more room to play with kind of what to do with land. I mean, on the south and west sides, we have lots of vacant lots to work with in swaths of land. So it's not a mad dash for land like it is in California. Not in California as a whole, but specifically in Los Angeles. I think what they do with affordability, and they have like this required affordability ordinance that I think is top notch. I mean, like I've seen, of course, there's models that, you can always look at and be like, oh, that's fantastic. But comparatively to Los Angeles, I was like, okay, Chicago's doing something right. Also in California, we get sued a lot. In Chicago, they don't get sued as much. So, which I have not decided if that's a good or bad thing yet. And so, yeah, there's definitely lots of nuances and differences, but I've also really learned a lot from being able to experience government planning in very different contexts. And of course, the transit is so much better in Chicago, and our planning around transit, I think, has had a good evolution even since I've been in Chicago, which has been 4 years. So, yeah, there's definitely lots of things that I've learned from both contexts.
Did you work on the Purple Line extension in LA? Is that what you meant by the West LA transit?
No, so the transit neighborhood team, some of us were assigned actual lines. I was assigned working on land use problems around a line. So like the Expo line expansion, I didn't work on the actual expansion of the Expo line, but what I did, since there was going to be like issues of gentrification or land grabbing around the expo line, having those multifamily design guidelines was a byproduct of the expansion of the expo line. Or like LAX, making sure, you know, the Crenshaw line was coming. We wanted the Olympics because that was when us and Paris were both bidding at the same time. So Paris has it next year and we have it in 2028. So that was a byproduct of kind of needing a better plan around that transit hub. So I worked more on the land use side than I did on the actual line extension itself.
I love how you broke down kind of the examples between LA and your experience in Chicago. I feel like people who have experienced, you know, both of these major cities, either as a visitor or as someone who lives there, but maybe listening to this and not familiar with the planning concepts or processes, can understand how some of the projects that you touched impact their day-to-day life and how kind of what happens in the background outside of that lived day-to-day experience. So thank you for just breaking that down in a way that is easily understandable for folks. And I'm even learning myself as like, oh, when I did LAX is real bad. When Jasmine picked me up, she was like, never again.
It's just,
if you pick somebody up from LAX, you truly love them.
I'm saying it's really sad because there is no good way to get there except to drive your car or take an Uber. Like,
have you ever tried the flyaway? You leave it from Union Station or Van Nuys? That's how I always got to the airport.
Oh, well, see, if I lived in the valley or if I lived downtown, that would probably make sense. But I don't live in those two areas. I don't know how else to get there.
Yeah, unless you take, so what I would do, because I lived in South Central, but I would it was cheaper for the Uber from Union Station than it was from LAX in a lot of ways. So like I would either take the Silver Line to the Green Line, go over and then get to the airport, or take the Expo Line to Union Station, get on the flyaway. But I didn't like driving.
This sounds like a lot of steps. I'm just gonna say.
I didn't like driving. Angelinos, y'all are lazy. There's a way to do it. You just got to work hard at it. Now, of course, if you have a disability or there's a reason why this stuff is complicated and it's not accessible to everybody, to your point, Jasmine, right? It's kind of like it's I had to jump through hoops. You're right. So I take back my statement. Most of y'all are lazy. Some of y'all are justified.
You mentioned your role now as the Chicago Recovery Plan Director. What does that look like? And I guess, how would you describe that position and some of the day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, so I love this role. So basically, as you know, pandemic, it's here, it's happening. And so as we were in the 2021 budget cycle, the Biden administration released the American Rescue Plan. And so what Mayor Lightfoot did is she said, okay, we have this American Rescue Plan dollars, but we're also going to do, as a city, is sell a bond, a social impact bond to investors. And we're going to take that money and we're going to invest it. And we're going to put that money with the American Rescue Plan. And we're going to call it the Chicago Recovery Plan. So that is the birth child of Mayor Lightfoot. And so each department, depending on what type of programs or services they could offer, got a chunk of that funding. And so my particular department, between 11 different programs, we have $237 million to distribute. Now, specifically, the way I looked at it was, yes, this is about external resiliency and fighting the pandemic, but then also looking at the city of Chicago's planning department saying, what internal resiliency measures do we need to be taking? Like the city of Chicago, although it's smaller than the city of Los Angeles, only has 44 to 50 planners at any given time, but they're charged with way more by ordinance, like economic development. As in like actually putting out tax incentives, TIF. We have tax increment financing here. So TIFs to help with redevelopment. So they have a lot of responsibility, but I feel like, still to this day, severely understaffed. And so I was like, what measures can we put in place also internally with this funding so that we don't find ourselves in a 2020 version of our planning department again, where we're scrambling to find resources and get on Zoom and do all these things, and also become more transparent. be more proactive in how we're doing, be more thoughtful about how we're equitably distributing the resources that we have as a city. And so under the 11 different programs that we have things like, we have a community development grant, which is a grant that we give out to small business owners who haven't been affected by COVID-19. We have a community wealth building pilot, which thinks about community investment vehicles in businesses. So like, think about housing cooperatives, shared ownership models. We have programs surrounding what we call equitable transit oriented development. So prioritizing putting affordable housing in near transit on the north side of Chicago, but then thinking about just getting businesses and those vacant lots repurposed on the south and west sides where there's a lot of vacancy around the transit lines. So that's just like a taste of the things that we've been able to do. We have this other program called Public Outdoor Plazas, where we invested in some of the vacant lots to become plazas in communities on the south and west sides predominantly. We do have a few on the north side where we paid to a delegate agency or a nonprofit to revitalize them for 3 years. And so thinking about, some of these are the nicest, newest parks that they've had in decades. And so like, kind of using the American Rescue Plan dollars for activation and development, like physical development and not just services, which has been really cool. We have a predominantly all women team. I have a great, I have the best team in Chicago. Argue with your mama. We have a great team of people of very diverse voices. And so that's why we have these core values that we come back to over and over again when we're thinking about our grant making it more accessible and just distributing those dollars. And then we're very analytical. So I'm also over our data management in the department, because I think data management and data informed policy making gets lost a lot. And so thinking about impact and not just like dishing out dollars, but how are those dollars reinvesting themselves, or what do they get us? And a product is saying like, okay, we should continue to fund this program even after the American Rescue Plan dollars are gone, or after the social impact dollars are gone, because these are the impacts that happen, and we should corporate fund this. And so yeah, it's like my baby in a way, because I'm in charge of creating this system and monitoring these programs and reporting to the Treasury and keeping everything in order. But also I love my team and we're good at collaborating. It's not just like Nina is the czar of, this program. We truly do get in rooms and whiteboard, like, what have we seen happen? What do we want to change? How do we want to be creative and inventive? And being able to have a team that is with you, and shares your same values is very rare sometimes. And so I'm very blessed to run this program.
Where can our listeners and Nimo and I find more information about the Chicago recovery, the plan? Is there a plan available to read, or where can we find it?
Yeah, so if you Google City of Chicago recovery plan, I'm sure all the links will pop up. Specifically, my department has a microsite that has a very long kind of address, but if you Google Department of Planning and Development, City of Chicago, Chicago Recovery Plan, you'll learn about it. And also, I know this is going to come out after the American Planning Conference in Philly, but my team will be presenting 2 sessions about the work that we've done. One in-person session in Philly, and then one of the virtual sessions talking about specifically how we're using American Rescue Plan dollars. So yeah, happy to talk to any of my colleagues across the nation who are interested in learning more about how our programs work.
Okay. I'm like, wait, y'all, that's what y'all doing? Okay. I was like,
it's gonna be dope. Every time honestly, APA don't deserve us. And you can even keep that in. APA don't deserve us. I say that to their face. But what makes it worth it to me is creating and cultivating this community. And that's going to conferences and seeing my colleagues from across the nation and hearing their stories. Us we could go from kikiing about Creed 3 to, talking about the intricacies of a zoning change in Houston, Texas. It's a great experience. It definitely warms my heart every year.
And I'm inspired by, what you shared about what you all have decided to do, what you all have done with the recovery plan dollars and ARPA dollars. And not just looking at it as either doing what you were already doing pre-COVID, but thinking of really changing the face, because what I've seen a lot is that it came, the money hit, it was quick, and people had to get creative and figure out how to make it work. But without having the people in place to be intentional about how to do that, things just still end up being scattered. And so I love that you all sound like you were able to expand your team, because you can be thoughtful when people are not being overworked, and when people are, having a balanced work environment, and then you can ultimately serve residents better in that way. So yeah, I definitely enjoy following the success you all have. I've also seen Baltimore, they have a very kind of intentional face of what they've been doing with their recovery plan too. So I've been inspired by watching that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think good planning is intentional and transparent. I think that's when you have planners in the planning department that's not responsive, but they're proactive. I think you always get better outcomes for whatever jurisdiction you are making those plans for. Just circling up again, what would you consider to be some of the highs and lows, or challenges or opportunities in post COVID-19 recovery planning? If we can say post COVID-19, I don't know if we're ever going to be in a
post COVID world. Well, I think it hits on a lot of different things. And I will say it is a struggle, especially in changing political climates, to be steadfast in what your professional opinion is. Planners, I don't believe planners are non-political, and I don't think that we are neutral. I know people say that. I think that's some bull s. I won't cuss. I think planners, if you're following the ethics and morality of what we should be doing, right, versus what we have done and what we are currently doing, then you should be giving recommendations to the political leaders that you think are best, not at the whim of one administration or another. Which again, even as we saw through the Trump administration and the Biden administration, even in Los Angeles, with the changing landscape of mayor, every city, right, changes mayors, changes administrations, a director changes, and then your whole thing is out the window. I think for me, the struggle is to say to anybody, let's slow down, right? And I don't always win those battles of the let's slow down and be thoughtful, because that's not everybody's clock, right? Everybody has their own clock as to what they think should be getting done and how they think it should be getting done, and on what timetable they think it should be getting done. And I think what I am lucky to have is a commissioner who believes in my vision, an administration who understands the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then a team who understands how to put it into practice. And so the difference between those who do and those who teach is that you have to be able to not just say these words in a vacuum, but to also articulate it in your policies and in your methodology for what you're doing. And so that's why I say the 5 values that we stick to really help to ground our decision making and thinking about, being data informed, being people centered, thinking about being innovative. And government is afraid to fail. There's no such thing as failure in government, because people already have a very adversarial relationship with government, especially from communities like the ones I'm from, right? And so when you make room to actually make improvements, you also have to make room for failure. You have to be prepared to say, this didn't work, and we like to go back, and being transparent about that can sometimes come back to bite you, right? And so I think if there's anything that I think was difficult, is that, like, just understanding the checks and balances of, okay, like, we need to move fast, we need to get this information out there, but I also need to do it with some dignity and some ethical anchors in order to make sure that I'm not just pushing something through for the sake of pushing something through, or giving people money just for the sake to say we did it. And then in 10 years, when we look back at this, at the stats, only 8% of them ever came to fruition. And so for me, especially being a young Black woman in power, talking the way I do, with the nails that I have, with the earrings that I wear, with the hair that the way I wear my hair, it's even more of people always kind of contesting your ability to make decisions. But one thing that I have is self-confidence. And I'm also not a fool, right? Because remember, I was telling you, when you're planning in somebody else's home, you have to humble yourself. So there's a lot of humbling that I have done in order to understand how to approach problems. And so instead of just coming through with a bulldozer and ruining relationships and saying it's my way or the highway, I am more thoughtful, have better relationships, and have the and wise enough to say, to some extent, we need to be collaborative. And then when it comes down to it, I can make the final call to say, this is what we're doing. And so that has probably been the biggest challenge over the last year and a half, is just being able to do things the way my professional experience and my personal identities have taught me this is the way we should approach it. And then also being open to failure.
You might see me looking down. I'm like taking notes, like, like this is all very relevant. I'm like, yes. Oh my God. Okay. I was just still wrapping my mind.
It's fine.
Because I feel like I don't, and I guess I hold back a little bit on, on the podcast on what I do in my day to day, but it hits. What you're saying is hitting, and I'm like, I got some email, I got some things I need to shake up when I get back to work tomorrow.
And the thing is, I worked my way up to this. Like, I wasn't a baby planner. Well, maybe. Okay. I've always been very straightforward. I will say, shockingly, even to my own surprise sometimes in the rooms that I'm in. But at some point, you just have to own who you are and what you bring to the table. And what I always remind myself is, I'm highly employable. Okay, I'm gonna speak truth to power, so I can lay my head down at night. And at least if they say no, I said my piece. And that's really all you can do. Ooh. Sorry, y'all.
Toto agrees. We have this little segment on the podcast whenever we have guests on. We have to come up with a better name for it, Nemo, right now, which is Hot Takes. And it's like a speed round of 6 or so urban planning issues, urban planning topics, and we are going to state the topic and then ask you to give us your initial thoughts on them. And so, Nemo, do you want to kick us off?
So you'll have about 45 seconds. So we'll cut you off pretty abruptly, but you have about 45 seconds to respond. And it is whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong. And some of them are intentionally broad, just to hear your thoughts. So the first one is in response to a tweet that was going around planning Twitter. And I'm sure I could even just say, what are your thoughts on planning Twitter? But the tweet that was going around is, it was a meme of, I forgot what Disney movie it was, but he had a lot of like knives to him. And everyone was saying, what is your unpopular urbanist opinion? And so Nina, what is your unpopular urbanist opinion?
That we should be working to make our jobs non-existent. Like, if we're truly doing the work that we want to do as far as empowering communities, especially marginalized voices, to be in charge of their own fate when it comes to the built environment that they live in and thrive in, then we should, as the experts in the room, quote unquote, be trying to undo the system of planning itself, and having to have somebody in a room say this goes here and this goes there. And so I think that's aspirational, of course. The planners are not going to disappear by tomorrow, but I would say that's probably my controversial opinion. We should be working towards making our jobs non-existent.
I'm going to take it to another perspective, and that's housing. And so
Mm-hmm.
the National Low Income Housing Coalition, they just released their annual report, The Shortage of Affordable Homes in the United States. And the report found that there is a national shortage of about 7.3 million affordable and available rental homes for extremely low income renters. Those are the ones that have incomes at or below the federal poverty line, or they make 30% of the area median income. And so, what are your kind of thoughts on affordable housing broadly and as it relates to this report letting us know how far we are from reaching those severely vulnerable neighborhoods and communities?
Housing. I mean, no matter where you live, housing. I believe housing is a human right. So I think the way America looks at housing is just backwards. I think we shouldn't be thinking of, well, I think there's this false narrative or dream that like, oh yeah, go buy a house, you're gonna be great, the American dream. Like, no. First of all, Black people, when it comes to our taxes, we be overtaxed statistically by assessors, and then when it comes to the market, we're being undervalued, so we lose money on both sides. Home ownership is not going to save Black people. It is not. It is not going to be a part of our liberation. What we should be focusing on is actually expanding the government to, again, either subsidize housing, put caps on housing costs, and for them to own more property rights.
That's time.
There you go. I
You
could give you
summed it up.
a video essay about our housing problems. So
I'll just give a nugget that I think people are very easily forgetful when it comes to government subsidized housing. The mortgage that we know today is a government subsidy. Like the 30-year self-amortizing mortgage did not exist before the government came up with that, with the National Housing Act and the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And so, and then all the veterans programs, the subsidized of suburban neighborhoods, like it's very easy for people to say, oh no, we don't want to subsidize housing, but we've always done it. That's how America has such high home ownership. And so all of a sudden it's an issue.
Because on who's using it. Because once all those GI Bills got and they start going to the suburbs, they was like, public housing, what is this thing? And then you couldn't get access to mortgages because one of those contract homes on the south and on the south and west sides of Chicago, it's a mess. Because once again, your human right at the base level to have housing and to have access to stability, as soon as we get that, it's like, oh no, we got to pick and choose who actually has access to those privileges.
Nimo, hit us with the next one.
I don't know if it comes up a lot in planning, but I do know sometimes it is used as a tool. But I'm curious your perspective in being in the government now on social media platforms for neighborhoods. So apps like Nextdoor, Citizen, Ring, the security system, they also have a platform. What are your thoughts on that?
Toxic, not useful, NIMBYs. Even in my own neighborhood, I mean, it's just all it's counterintuitive to actually building community and actually talking to your neighbors and actually having conversation about how you feel about safety or what safety even means to you, because safety means different things to different people. And so I'm not a fan of them because I just have not seen them be used in a way that's not harmful, like most of the time, I will say. Like, of course, that can't be a huge generalization, but I think they're more problematic than they are useful.
That's valid. Jumping kind of back to housing, what are your thoughts on the commercial to residential conversion? So CoStar came out with an article early in February identifying several projects in the loop of Chicago, which I wanted to bring it up to you, where there were office buildings that have planned conversions, either full conversions to apartment or partial conversions to apartments. Do you think this is a true viable solution to our housing affordability issues? And office vacancies.
Well, I think generally, I will say, I think we should build buildings with a few different uses in mind, because over time, things change. There was a time where people loved living in the suburbs and hated downtown. And we were, and we as Black people, brown people were relegated to the inner city, right? Quote unquote. And now there's this resurgence of, oh, everybody wants a 15-minute city. So let's come back downtown. Los Angeles has seen it, obviously Chicago. Chicago has always had like a pretty strong downtown, but Detroit is seeing it. And so, I mean, I think generally though, yes, we should be thinking about buildings not as this one thing that's going to be here forever, but this building that can encompass a lot of different uses. And if the market is saying the need is housing, then let's change it to housing. All right. This is fun.
I was like, I know I'm trying to like delicately cut you off.
No, I love it. It's like being on a game show.
I think we got one more each. So we talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode, but your hot takes on public transit.
Public transit, access to the city is also a human right. Viable public transit should be a human right. I think we should invest more in it. I just came back from this practicum in Paris, kind of learning about how they like government leaders in Paris and meeting with all these different departments and their public transit. I was like, wow, just think if America invested this much time and energy into our public transit, what people could have opportunity to. So so important, and we should invest more time, not just to the transit line itself, but to the community around it, and creating kind of those communities centered around transit in all neighborhoods, specifically in Black and brown neighborhoods, because we're the people who don't drive. I mean, statistically, income wise, we don't have cars are expensive. So
that's time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got to hear a little bit about your time in Paris for that. And
it was eye-opening experience. Now France has also rebranded their colonialism, so I could give you a whole video essay on that too, but their transit system, top notch.
And finally, this is a broad one, climate change. Planners' role in climate change.
I think, yeah, when we talk about sustainability, that's included in it. I mean, I think just protecting in 1995 in Chicago, there was this heat wave and a lot of thousands of Black and brown people, maybe not thousands, hundreds, Black and brown people on the South and West sides died because they just didn't have heating and cooling, right? And so like, it's not just about like, oh, like your carbon footprint, which is important, but mostly on billionaires and corporations, let's be for real. We need to be thinking about our most vulnerable communities when this extreme heat or extreme cold happens. And so if you're planning for the most vulnerable population, then you're planning for everybody. And we should think about how climate change affects those vulnerable populations.
I think we got the soundbite right there.
And that was right on time. Ooh, you did great.
Thanks.
So before we close up, we wanted to kind of get a little bit more into your journey and some words of wisdom to impart on listeners. So we're planning to launch a book club soon for podcast listeners. What books have made an impact on your journey? And they can be planning, not planning related.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I was laughing about this with my partner earlier because I'm an audio visual learner. So there's not a lot of books that I can like pull from. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I love NPR. So like if you're thinking like Code Switch, this is not what you asked me.
It all applies.
Code Switch, Throughline, 99% Invisible, like podcasts that make you think about other people's experiences in a way that tells stories. I also like, I mean, in the books that I do read, I read a lot of sci-fi, fantasy, like The Children of Blood and Bone, or The Darkest Child is a random book that I love from childhood. Like it just helps me to reimagine like what these different places are. One, sci-fi is like not real, right? The Children of Blood and Bone is about it's set in Africa, and it's about these children who have these mystical powers. But thinking about how they describe the landscape and the map and all these different things is or Game of Thrones, and thinking about, different places. I think it just helps to expand how I think about, even in fiction or sci-fi, what the world could be and how it could look. and I like to use those as references. I also am, into a lot of pop culture type of podcast, because I also think I learn about places and spaces in those venues. So I don't have a particular book for you, but those would be some of my recommendations to get into.
No, I think that's very important in this idea of like Black futures and people calling like Black Futures Month in terms of Black History Month. I think it's very important because it's something that I haven't really looked into too much, but I think the idea of it is like Black people exist in the future and like what could our lives be in the future? Because when you read those books historically or watch the films historically, we're not necessarily present in the images. And it's like we exist in it. So what can we imagine our lives to be like 30, 50, 60 years from now? And how do we fit into all the new nuances? So I think those are very useful.
Thanks. Although I did not answer your question, I hope for all the audio visual learners out there.
No, I appreciate it. I think that perspective is helpful too, in like how we learn and like how we receive information. And yeah, sometimes I turn on the TED Talk channel on Samsung's free channels just for like background noise.
Yeah.
Because it's like you get to see the people presenting. They sometimes have clips and you're also like learning and hearing. So no, I completely understand. Thank you for those recommendations.
That's very fancy, Nemo. Just having a TED Talk on in your living room.
Just on the background.
Just in the background.
Love it.
And do you have any advice for listeners who are interested in pursuing planning? I was so touched to hear earlier about how you were able to start a program between USC and the youth. Again, me kind of being that unicorn, not realizing what it is like to not know planning, know what planning is from a young age. I mean, I had my interests obviously before I got to that time of being a senior in high school where I was interested in place and space, but yeah, just hearing what advice you would have if anyone's listening and thinking about pursuing planning.
Lean into what makes you special. Lean into what you think are flaws and find the beauty in them. I think finding the beauty in the identities that I was born with couldn't help. And at times may have been ashamed of, right? Nobody like, oh, I grew up poor. Like nobody's like, jumping for joy or things like that. But but I found strength in my Blackness, or I found strength in these other things. And so I would say, especially if we're going to change the landscape of planning to be agents of change and people who are going to undo harm, then we have to start truly diversifying, not just the brochures, but truly diversifying what planning looks like and how it's defined. And like in that future that we're working towards, what does planning look like there? Do we exist? Do we not exist? What does it look like? But I think leaning into who you are as a person instead of being told to assimilate, or feeling like you have to assimilate, will make you a stronger planner in the long run.
That's so helpful because in the field, it's very easy. And I think you said it best earlier. You said, I'm a land use planner that thinks about transportation. I think when you're starting in planning, it's very easy. Even in the undergrad program, they tell you, okay, pick a concentration. Either you're going to be in housing. So this is your coursework for housing. You're going to be in transportation. This is your coursework for transportation. But where your interests lie and where your skill sets lie might bridge those.
Right.
And I think that's very important to recognize where your skill set is, where your interests lie, and to build a platform or a space for yourself that allows you to work across those different areas.
Right. And most times you're not alone. I mean, like, I leaned into who I was, who I am. And there's women like you all who I'm like, oh, I find inspiration in you. Or like, yeah, I would stop every Black woman at every planning conference I ever saw, and I make them my mentor to this day. I still do that, right? So it's kind of like lean into that, because there are other people out there looking for another you, right? Another them. to be inspired by and to be lifted up by and be supported by. And so the more we come into these rooms being authentically ourselves, when we feel safe enough to do so, and sometimes even when we don't, the better off our profession will be.
We usually do takeaways for the episode. Nimo, do you have any takeaways for today's episode?
Yeah, I will say, and I was trying to sneak and get a picture of us not looking, but we can take like a cute one.
Okay.
So I moved my camera because one of my screens was looking dirty. But yeah, my takeaway. Sorry, Jasmine, I'm just giving you a bunch of stuff to cut out, or you could leave it in. So my takeaway is actually another thing that you had mentioned earlier, Nina, about what your purpose is in planning, and leaning into that undoing of harm, even though you are a part of an institution that perpetuates harm, but knowing what your purpose is in that. So that's definitely a takeaway for me. Like Jasmine was saying, when you're picking your concentration, for me coming in, well, from undergrad and then going into grad school, it's like, I want to do community development. I want to get into the nitty gritty of the problems. I want to be on the ground. I want to be at the nonprofit. And that's not what ended up happening so far, my career trajectory, but I do own some of that internal fear of, what if I can't undo the harm? What if I make it worse? And I think some of that fear did keep me from being directly tied into the community. Although one of the things that motivates me and gets me up to do my job every morning is that I do get to see impacts of policy decisions happen every day. It may not be I might not be the face of a community-led movement, whether it's through government or through organizations, but that's still something that I think is inherent in my purpose, whether I continue to do planning for years, whether I whether I continue to be planning adjacent. And so, yeah, just kind of thinking about my own career trajectory and what that looks like on a day-to-day is my takeaway.
And you have the right to change. I mean, you have the possibility, your career is going to be long. Well, hopefully you win the lottery and are delivered from work, because I don't wish work on nobody. Nor do I. Right. Nor do I dream of labor. But yeah, just because
you are
start
speaking
in one
all
pathway,
of the tenets of this podcast.
That is one of our tenets.
We firmly believe.
What's a job?
It's a job. I mean, yeah, it's capitalism. I'm part of it. I need a job. I gotta pay these bills. Who gonna pay this mortgage? Like, and again, perpetuate capitalism. But you have the ability to ebb and flow, right? And that's what I always tell myself. Like, I have the ability to ebb and flow. And when I feel like your purpose should be steady. Like, my purpose is making more opportunities for little girls, little Ninas in the world, right? Because again, if you think about little Black girls and some of the most vulnerable populations we have, no matter how their identities intersect, whether they're a trans girl or they're have different abilities or whatever it may be, if you plan for them, you're planning for everybody. But I could be flipping burgers and my purpose would be the same. I could work at a nonprofit. My purpose would be the same. I could work in government like I am now. My purpose would be the same. So you just have to remember that you can ebb and flow however you want to.
And my final takeaway for the episode is that I left government and I left planning behind. and true like planning,
and
like
that is okay.
Working for the city in the planning department, or working for the MPO, or working for the state planning agency, I left that behind. And I felt like my purpose when I came into this field was wanting to make an impact that I could see that was tangible. I'm like, I enjoy reading, but I'm also a very visual person, and I wanted to be able to see my impact sooner than 2028, Nina.
I know. It's a long game. It's
a long game in planning. And maybe that's my own selfishness or whatever. I think everybody has their role, right? Everybody has their role. If they want to do long planning, they want to do neighborhood planning or community development. As long as you, like you said, you're feeling your purpose. And so I moved over to the real estate side of things because that to me seemed like a timeline that was feasible. I can work on an affordable housing development project today, and in 12 months, people are going to be moving into it with 80% or 60% AMI. And that way I can visibly see when I drive down the street my impact on neighborhoods. And it might be a smaller impact. I might be impacting 100 residents rather than the millions that fly into LAX every day. But that to me seemed feasible and sizable. And so I think for people listening to this podcast who are not planners, but care about their neighborhoods, care about the communities that they live in, care about the communities that they grew up in, even if you're working in finance or you're working as an accountant, if you care about your neighborhood, there's still opportunities for you, not in the planning field, not in the political field, not in the government sphere, where you can make an impact positively on your neighborhood.
Absolutely. And I will say, especially being in this position that I am now, like, I rely so much on non-planners. Like, I rely on my team, my finance team. They're in the planning department. None of them are professional planners, but I need them to help me execute the things that I'm doing, right? Or my GIS folks, they're not planners, you know. I'm relying on them to help me map the data so I can track my impact. You know, so there's all sorts of ways that people are contributing to the vitality of our built environment, even again if they're not actual planners, which is why in some far distant futures we won't even have to exist, because everybody will see themselves as planners. They will all be contributing to the fabric and the change of their neighborhood, no matter what type of job they do, because they're all contributing to how that built environment is being shaped. So I totally feel you.
I just want to make one last request of you. Can you explain briefly AICP? We didn't get a chance to talk about this with Byron, which I now realize, Nimo, we should have.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I think
Byron was on.
that's something that is very specific to planning, and it's a certification. And just tell us about that in the process for you.
Yeah, I was listening to this episode earlier, and I think we might have mutual people, but I've never met them. So it's fascinating to hear that. So yes, AICP again is the American Institute of AIC Credit Planners. Accredited planners,
certified planners.
Certified. Thank you.
American
It's a Monday night. I'm one of them though. I promise. I passed the test the second time, not the first time, but I did pass it the second time, and I am not ashamed of it whatsoever. Standardized tests are not for us. Okay, neither is that test. Although you know, I think it's an accreditation, of course. Like in a place like California, it was really important for me to get it because planning in California is completely different. You know, there's required comprehensive plans by law. Governments hire a lot of planners. Council people hire a lot of planners. So in order to, you know, especially as a Black woman, you know, we feel I don't have the privilege of mediocrity. So therefore I have to do more in order to get noticed. So I felt like it was important. Now, feeding into the institution of AICP, do you need to do it? If you don't feel moved to do it, don't do it. I think for me, it helps to hold me accountable to some sort of like my professional development and the connections that I make. I've also drank the juice on APA. You know, I'm heavily involved in APA because I'm constantly trying to change it. But also have found value in it, and my mentors and every opportunity that I've gotten in my career has stemmed in some way from APA. And so being an accredited planner, I think, gives you a little bit more grounding, at least to some type of moral and ethical principles about our profession, that I think can be important for some people, but may not be important for everybody. And so like, you're probably hearing a non-committal answer from me if people should get it, because it really is on a case-by-case basis. I did it, and if you need help or resources, like I said, I took that exam twice. You can always reach out to me. I still got my little, you know, Google file with all my study materials in it. And I think it was transformational for me based on my experience and what I wanted to bring to the field. And then also when I get in rooms with people, I know everything they say. I can talk the same talk. And sometimes having those letters behind my name just proves to them that I'm worthy of some kind, right? Which again, you don't have to feed into that trope if you don't want to. And so yeah, that's basically what it is. It's given out by the American Planning Association, who also, is over the planning accreditation board for planning schools. So there is some credibility behind having those letters in your name.
I think the report is that Black women are the greatest population pursuing advanced degrees. You can check me.
It sounds right.
I think
right.
we're for sure greater than Black men and white women. I'm not sure about white men, but I always wonder how much of us in our pursuit of advanced degrees is just trying to qualify with the same standards as somebody with a bachelor's degree. Like, just how much we have to do so much.
It's a lot of that.
Said, I was like, how much of us are really just going to get this degree so we can have some letters behind our names? So you can believe.
Mediocrity is rampant depending on what the identity politics are in that particular environment. So unfortunately, that's why I say, if we stop buying into it, then it doesn't hold as much weight. That's why I say it's a case by case basis. But yeah, sometimes to get into those rooms or to have your resume not chucked out of a pile, you got to have a name of a school and some letters behind your name. But take that as what you will. I mean, as far as the listeners, because I could go both ways.
Yeah, no, that was a really helpful kind of background, and I think an honest answer. I know you said it was non-committal, but we're here for honesty. So I appreciate that.
Yes.
And before we close out, what is some of your takeaways from this conversation?
Well, one, I'm so impressed by you two and just like so enthralled by you two. So one, congratulations on this platform and on the things that I've been able to learn about you just in this short conversation. I think this space that you're, like I said, I'm an visual learner so this space and this platform that you're creating is probably more important than you can even imagine. And so I hope that you all sit with that and kind of absorb what you're doing in these conversations and how you're helping, again, the next little Black girl find her way to her purpose. So I definitely have learned and am honored to be here for that. And yeah, just continue to be yourself and do what you need to do, because there's going to be lots of opportunity to make change. So that's what I've gotten from this conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as we end season 3, Nimo and I have a lot of discussions on direction and everything. So thank you for that. We really appreciate it. Super glad. We mentioned this offline, I think, but we have been following you since at least 2018. And so it means a lot to us to have you on the podcast, to be recording this in Women's History Month, even though it will come out in April. And to be looking at this screen and see two additional accomplished Black women in their own respective fields, in their own respective segments of the world and segments of the country. And so I'm excited to be in this space. And we did a lot this season. You can see a live in-person episode on YouTube. You can listen to all 10 episodes of this season and all 20 episodes of the last 2 seasons. We have reels online where we toured all different cities this summer because we was outside for real. We was really outside. And what else, Nimo?
Yoga session for our health and wellness Black History Month theme.
The episode before Byron.
Yes.
Was that okay? Yes.
Yeah, and so we had folks could join in and do a quick restorative yoga session, which was great to see that shared community over Zoom. And so we hope to maybe some more in-person events next season. I feel like we had so many great guests this season. We really went and we said we're having guests, so we definitely found that balance this season, which was really great. One of my favorite things about the podcast, getting to learn and connect with others. When we come back, we will continue to drop episodes every other Tuesday. And you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the 4 Degrees Pod.
Peace out, y'all.